Welcome into King Whale's album review party, everybody. Thank you again for joining us. Ty, this is our third session.
I didn't
Like,
think we'd make it this far.
right? It's crazy. It feels like a milestone. It's only three episodes in, but still, partnering with somebody, it can be tough. So I think we should just take a moment and just really reflect on how great that is.
Feels good to commit to something for more than two times.
Right? Right? Especially in this world, especially being we're like zillennials, like we're kind of Gen Z, kind of like millennials. So it's a big accomplishment all
Oh,
the way around.
uh,
And
God, I hate that. I hate that term.
you hate Zillennials.
Zillennials. I don't think I've ever heard that before.
I'm
Man, do
a
I hate that.
I'm gonna go ahead and issue an apology because I'm doing this even though I'm a little sick, but that just shows our commitment to reviewing these fantastic albums.
The music is so good, you have to.
You just have to, and it's okay. I've got orange juice right here, so I'm gonna get better. I'm a heal as the process goes on. But today we need to talk about an album by one of hip hop's finest MCs, and that is Lupe Fiasco.
Your favorite MC.
He is my favorite MC. He is my favorite artist of all time. He is the one that inspired me to make music in the first place. Any song that I do only exists because Lupe Fiasco exists. So, um, and today we're talking about an album he released. Was it 2 years ago? 2022 came out.
It, yep, it was 22.
Yep. Okay. And that was Drill Music in Zion.
What a I really love. I really love this album. Like out the gate, I think it exists in one of my favorite Lupe records.
In the hierarchy. Yeah,
Yes.
I think anyone that also knows me, from my friends from back home and stuff, when we're talking about Lupe, if I'm talking about my favorite albums, Tetsuo and Youth is always, I mean, I won't say always going to be number one, but it's right, it's the pinnacle to me.
Hmm.
Um, but Drill Music in Zion is definitely, I think, in his upper echelon. I really like how it's kind of a switch up in style because you don't really hear Lupe do jazz rap too much. I think that's why I
Hmm.
like Tetsuo and Youth so much because he did this song Little Death with
Hmm.
Crystal Torres, and it was kind of like his experimenting with jazz rap. And as a jazz musician, we came up on a lot of rap. Like I'd studied a lot of Trap Called Quest, Mos Def, Talib Kweli, those
Hmm.
jazz rap guys. The Roots, some of their first albums, hip hop, jazz.
Hmm.
Um, you don't hear it too much anymore. Like even the Roots have kind of gotten away from that style and kind of more of like a I can't really describe their style as much. They just kind of went like all hip hop. They kind of like took a lot of the jazz out of their hip hop, but it
Hmm.
feels really good to see Lupe kind of go back to that in 2022 when, the genre is over 30 something years old and everybody's turning to, all kinds of trap music. But it's like if you look at this album like on Wikipedia, it's listed as a jazz rap album. That's one of the categories. And it's really cool to see Lupe, put his stance on one of my favorite styles.
And it really feels like a jazz rap album. I
Mhm.
I think um not just in having, brass or woodwind instruments like playing in the background, but I feel like conceptually it
Mhm.
feels like an album that was made to be a jazz rap album. Um, what a really interesting creation story of how it came to be. Doing a little bit of research for it, this album was made in 3 days, only 3 days,
Mhm.
which was even an extension. Lupe intended for it to only be one day worth of freestyles that turned into coherent tracks. And I think for a primarily freestyle based album to be turned into this really conscious, um, like lyrically tight set of
Mhm.
tracks, I think is very impressive and telling of Lupe's lyrical style and his prowess because he's able to turn these deep-seated thoughts that he's been having on the rap industry into incredibly poetic rap.
Yeah, and I think like, especially one of my favorite songs on there. Um, I want to say on Them, the last song on there.
Hmm.
Um, I think you could tell that it was a freestyle, especially when his first verse, he just rappers die too much. That's it. That's the verse. And it's like you could kind of tell that like he came up with that on the spot and just decide, yeah, that's how this verse is going to go, because that's how powerful and that's how real this issue is in hip hop, where we just talk about guys dying like we talk about the sun rising. Like it's just natural. Like, but it's so, and I think Lupe sheds a lot of light on the topic of, because this is after Nipsey Hussle had recently passed, I believe, when this album had come out, and someone else had just died too. And Lupe's like, we can't, like, this can't become normal. Like,
Hmm.
you can't feel like this is natural. This is just the way hip hop goes. This is not natural. And so
Hmm.
I really love that song because I think that's something that really affects Lupe um throughout his life, throughout his time in hip hop. I mean, someone
Hmm.
brought up how many people died in Chicago. He got into a really big beef with Chief Keef over it because he was
Hmm.
talking about how many guys have died in Chicago because it's
Hmm.
the murder capital of the world. And Lupe started crying, and he's like, I look at some of these lyrics and guys like Chief Keef that just talk about blowing a guy off his block, in every other song, and Chief Keef obviously didn't like that, but it
Hmm.
was a conversation that needed to be had because this death is not natural. It's not. It shouldn't be happening. Like you shouldn't have the same, and you don't have the same mortality, right? But like being a rapper shouldn't be as dangerous as like being a cop or something like that. You know what I mean?
Hmm. I think what's really interesting to me is in an interview, Lupe was talking about how he doesn't necessarily hate that in music, people talk about death or murder. That is not the issue he takes, but very
Mm-hmm.
specifically, he has an issue with the real world effect that drill music seems to be having in the communities that it's developed in. That
Right.
it's not just talking about killing. It is directly tied
Mm-hmm.
to a lot of deaths for upcoming rappers. And he's right. It is absolutely tragic, but I appreciate where Lupe's coming from because he doesn't come from the position of just using this as an aesthetic of goodwill. I feel like if you look into like his personal life and what he does philanthropically with Chicago with the mural program that he runs with his sister Aisha Jaco, who has an absolutely killer opening track with
Oh
the Lion's
yes.
Den
Oh yes.
or Alliance Dean
Mm-hmm.
absolutely murders it with that poem and sets the tone for the entire
Yes.
album.
Mm-hmm.
He absolutely he feels this internally and is trying to do everything in his power to help empower um young kids in Chicago.
Yeah. And like I said, on that song, and I think he really illustrates there's a difference between talking about it and glorifying it. You know what I mean? Because,
Hmm.
he's like a lot of like if you're just talking about it, that's talking about your story and where you come from. But if you're glorifying it, like, oh yeah, this is what makes me cool because I shot somebody, other people that listen to that are gonna want to be like you. And how do they get to your point? They think they gotta go shoot somebody. And so, and I love how Lupe on the album he talks about like sometimes he feels like he's part of the problem
Hmm.
because it's like this kind of stuff makes money. So we're saying this and it makes money, but is it worth it? He's like, as what did he say? Like, because I'm part of the problem. Sometimes the peace, sometimes the problem. Just
Hmm.
more lyrical insights from Lupe. Um, but it's
Yeah.
very deep, and I feel like this album definitely came from a deep place within himself. I think it's probably the most introspective and the most emotional I've ever heard Lupe on a project. I would definitely say that.
Yeah, it feels deeper from the heart. And to your point, I believe it was on Phonem, the closer, where he says he has this, it's almost like a little bit of a skit where he's kind of talking to himself, where he says, "No, you can't talk about that. You hang around gangsters and killers. Like you can't be talking about this. That this level of like some of it is so baked, some like connecting tissue is so baked into like culture that it's you can't root it all out, and he may feel this like it feels like he feels hypocritical at times speaking up about it, but I don't feel like he should. I feel like there is a strong like distinction between what he's talking about, but you can see
Hmm.
this conflict that he has within himself,
Yeah.
and it makes for a uh I think it makes for a very vulnerable take, which I just absolutely love to see in a rapper like Lupe. For someone who is so thoughtful and introspective, to be vulnerable is just a beautiful and poetic combination that we get to see live in this album.
And especially because, like you said, most of that came from freestyling. Because,
Hmm.
most rappers would have to dig. I'm not going to compare Lupe to other rappers, but like think about how many rappers would really have to dig inside their emotions to pull out something that deep. Like they don't just live
Hmm.
with that on their sleeve. They'd have to like really sit and think about it and write it out. But Lupe, he just freestyled it. And a lot of people
Hmm.
sometimes they get like they're surprised by like how good he is at freestyling, but
Hmm.
Lupe is a master. Like Ty Dolla Sign talked about this one song they came out with. It was either Next to It or Deliver, or it might have been both. But when Lupe was working with Ty Dolla Sign a lot of times, he was like, "Yeah." Lupe would just come to the studio and we'd play the beat, and he'd be like, "Okay," and he just freestyle the whole track, and then he'd be like, "All right, is that it? We good? That's it. That's the song." And
I'm
he
like,
was
I
like,
got another place to be.
and Ty Dolla Sign was like blown, like, how did you just come up with this off the top of your head? But he's just, he did a couple of freestyles on Sway in the Morning
Hmm.
that were absolutely incredible. And like his last project, House, that came out right before this,
Hmm.
super crazy story. There's a guy in Orlando named Kalen Ellis, a producer who's friends with a lot of the Orlando artists that I know, like Jason Channel, Scalco Music, stuff like that. And he posted a beat on Twitter, and Lupe just started Lupe found it and just started freestyling over it, and they made a whole project. And it's a guy in Orlando that knows a lot of the same artists I know, and it's like just the level of talent is insane, and it's very
Which,
clear throughout this entire album.
which for quick context, that Orlando area is where Will and I are both from, and so
Oh, I
like
may
it
not have
feels
mentioned that. Yeah,
it's so strange that it comes from a place that is so close to home for us, and
yeah,
in a like you said, in a circle that you know a lot of people in,
yeah.
and
Like
so.
I've been to shows and parties in Orlando, music parties and stuff, and he might have been there. I don't know for sure because I never got a chance to meet him in person. But like I said,
Mhm.
we ran in the same circles. We just never really intersected. So for him
Right.
to, and of course now he's like signed to a label and completely blown up because of the
Hmm.
beats that he did with Lupe.
Hmm.
So yeah.
So how did you feel about there's no real features on this aside from Naira.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, is it a Chicago or Seattle? Is she a Chicago or Seattle based
I think it's
singer?
Chicago. I think she's
Was
Chicago.
it Chicago? Okay.
I want to say because
I
most
may
of the
just be
people,
being confused by the track Seattle that she's featured on.
yeah, most of the
Um,
people that Lupe works with, he usually meets them in Chicago.
okay.
Yeah.
But
Uh,
she had a very beautiful voice that I think added a lot of just a lot of power to some of the tracks that she's featured
mhm.
on. Autobado, Precious Things, and then of course my personal favorite of those, Seattle.
Seattle. Yeah, I was gonna say I was about to bring her up too because I was like I think her voice added a lot to this entire project. I'm really glad that
Hmm.
Lupe, found her and kind of brought her out. And I think Seattle, I kept my promise to the streets. I think that's my favorite, feature of hers on here. And
Absolutely.
I think it's very clear what Lupe wanted to say by not having any rap features on the album because there's a few
Hmm.
times where he'll do that. Um, like on his fourth album, I believe it was the Cool, not the Cool, sorry, Food and Liquor 2. Whatever I'm saying. Food and Liquor 2, he didn't have any rap features on there. He had features, but just no one else was rapping except for him. And then
Hmm.
he did the same thing on what album was that? Actually, it might be that one and this one and Drill Music. Because I think on some, I can't remember if he had any features on Drogus Waves. Can't remember if he had any rap features on that one. But on
Hmm.
most of Lupe's albums, like compared to a lot of other rappers, he's kind of like J. Cole in that, where he's usually the only one rapping. Like J.
Hmm.
Cole, like he's known for not having that many features on his works. And Lupe will have features, but again, most of the time, as far as like rap, most of the time it's just Lupe. And you can tell like whenever he has an album with a very specific message, that's what
Hmm.
he's doing.
Hmm.
That's kind of why, because he has a very specific story and message that he's telling in that particular album.
Absolutely. We also got to see the third mural track in this album
Oh
with
yes.
Miss Mural,
Yep.
which I've got to say has to easily is my favorite track on this album.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
I I am obsessed with it. I think his it almost feels a little uh ironic that we're talking about Lupe's album and the whole story of Miss Mural is an artist discussing the art process with a critic, and then the end the artist burning the critic alive on a pile of paintings. um
Pretty awesome.
I think he really doesn't hide, I think, his feeling of how art criticism like plays into the art that
Hmm.
is then created. And I think it is ironic that, we're sitting here talking and for me to be praising it so highly in this very setting that he's talking about, but I think he does it so beautifully, that it's impressive, that it's impossible to not talk about.
Oh yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Especially because, like, again, like when you like, where did mural come from? Well, it came from Tetsuo and Youth. And I can't remember actually if, like, one of the reasons why I love Tetsuo and Youth is because Lupe painted that album cover. And I
Yes,
think
and
he
he
did
did
the
the
same
same here.
thing with Joe Music and Zion. Yeah.
Yep.
And my wife is a painter. So that means even more. So I'll be like, hey, can you paint me like an album cover and stuff? But like, like that's a whole nother side of, like, it's just a whole nother parallel and dynamic to Lupe. Like, what artists do you know painted their album cover?
Hmm.
Can anyone name me one? Like, that's such a powerful, and then, his, to me, I think a mural from that project. I know we're talking about Joe Music and Zion, but I keep going back to Tetsuo and Youth. But that's where we
Hmm.
got Miss Mural from.
That's
Um, and like you talked about how he freestyled this album in just like a day, Mural is mostly freestyles. Like, someone was telling me he only wrote like maybe half of that song,
hmm
and someone he played the beat and he just started going and he didn't stop.
and
And
he sure didn't stop on that track.
and it just became this 9-minute masterpiece that I don't think hip hop will ever see again.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, and that's why Miss Mural, he just set the guy on fire at the end. Yeah, it's a pretty awesome track.
So were there any low points for you on this album? Things that didn't feel quite up to snuff for Lupe?
Um, like, I like when I'm in a concert, like when I went to see Lupe, and I'm gonna go see him again very soon, which is pretty exciting too, because I'm gonna go see him in um 16th, I believe, and I'll come back down to Florida, so we'll be in person again.
Hmm.
Um, so like when I'm in a concert and I hear Autobotto, because he's done it a couple of times the last couple of concerts, like we get all
Hmm.
hype and stuff.
Hmm.
But like when I'm listening to it through the album, I'm like, it just feels like kind of like a song that he put on there, so he had something he can hype up at his concerts. So like, if people are feeling it, they'll listen to it and they'll listen to the whole album. It feels
Hmm.
like it kind of sticks out. I'm not sure if that's like a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know if I call that like a low point. All I can say is that it definitely feels like it sticks out because it is obviously very different from all the other songs on the album.
Very different, especially for how early on in the like track listing it plays. I think it sets like a weird tonal thing, but
Hmm.
I still like it. I like
Yeah.
Autobotto. I don't have necessarily a problem with it, but yeah, it does kind of feel a little standoutish for better or worse.
Yeah, and I think that's just the only thing that, because it stands out, that's the only reason why. And so I kind of like it better that he put it at the beginning.
Mhm.
Um, because you don't really get like at least you're not like dragged out of the um sorry, I'm looking for, you're not like pulled out of the jazz rap tracks, by
Mhm.
Autobotto. Like, you got Aisha Jocko does her intro, then Gotti, and then Autobotto, and then you start going into like the jazz track messages and all this stuff. Feels like the meat of the album is after that track, and so like I think that's the difference between some of his other projects because a lot of them like he'll start with the meat. Like again, one of the first songs
Hmm.
on Tetsuo and You is Mural. So you're getting the
Hmm.
meat like right up front. And here it feels
Yeah.
like it takes a minute to like really get to where he wants to go. Like I feel like past Lupe would have put a song like On Fanam at the very beginning to be
Hmm.
like, hey, this needs to be heard. And I'm sure a
Right.
lot of people have heard that track, don't get me wrong, but I think so it's kind of more of like a philosophical than necessarily not liking the track. That's like the only, you know what I mean? It's not really like a low point. It's just kind of like the way he decided to do this feels a little bit more commercial than artistic. But again, it's
Hmm.
hard to call it like a low point because it's still a good song. It still
Right.
gets hype. It's still good at concerts and stuff. I think that's just the only way I could describe it.
Yeah. No, I think having the Lions Dean and then On Phonem be the two bookends for this album, they
Mhm.
really feel like it's more structured to set the tone of the album as a whole. More so than putting meat up front, like you
Yeah.
were saying. It definitely feels tighter thematically in that
Mhm.
regard of like no, this is what Lupe wants to focus on from the album title to the intro and closing tracks and then everything in between.
Yeah, and in a way, Alvaro still fits because again, the project is called Drill Music in Zion, and it's kind
Mhm.
of like Lupe Fiasco's response to the popular drill music, which is a term that I know someone from Chicago who's in my congregation, and he talked about like, oh yeah, people will talk about like, kind of in the hood areas, they talk about like, yeah, I'm gonna go run a drill, and that usually was something that could end up involving and costing the life of another black man, and so like
Mhm.
that's where drill music comes from. Like it literally comes from Chicago. And so I
Mhm.
feel like this is kind of Lupe's personal response to it. And Autobotto kind of follows that similar style, but you can tell he's talking about something on a completely different wavelength because he's on a different style with Autobotto than he is with
Mhm.
most drill music out there.
Yeah, what did he say in Miss Mural? Professionally accept what ethically I hate.
Yep.
I think that's
Yep.
kind of where
Another powerful line. Yeah.
he may be lying. I think Miss Mural, every line is is to some degree that diatribe that he goes on discussing both the painterly art world and art in general
Yeah.
is so good. But yeah,
Mhm.
because I think even I saw and when I was doing research in an interview, he even mentioned that he feels like I could absolutely do a drill rap album if I wanted to,
Oh
but
yeah.
I do not want to. Like
Yeah.
I feel like I've got the skill to do what that genre requires, but I ethically do not want to participate
Yeah.
in
Like
this style.
he has the skills, and it's like, and if he wanted to use the same lyrics, I mean, they're not that hard to, to copy. I mean, like a lot of drill music, like sometimes it tends to kind of be the same thing over and over again. So like he could easily just go out there and make one, and if he wanted to, he could do it under a pseudonym so people don't expect Lupe, and it would probably blow up because it's popular. But like I said, ethically, he feels like that's not something he wants to do. And
Mm-hmm.
I think for a lot of people, this album feels like a return to form, even though he kind of returned to form on Drogas. Because the last project Lupe did was after he left his label in 2015 from Tetsuo and Youth, he did Drogas Light,
Mm-hmm.
which was an album most people I'm pretty sure that's his worst album, honestly, because like a lot of people didn't like Lasers, but I think Lasers, at least he was still himself. With Drogas
Mm-hmm.
Light, it felt like he was like becoming somebody else. And like there are a couple of good songs on there, but I think
Mm-hmm.
overall that's definitely his weakest album. And I
As
think
a
the
whole.
reason why, yeah, I think that's what the label wanted Tetsuo and Youth to do. And in order for him to go and make his own songs that he really wanted to, I think he
Mm-hmm.
had to release all of these songs on an album because he still like owed them money or something. Because I'm not exactly sure how label constraints work, but like if
Uh-huh.
they recorded all these songs for him and like they paid for it, basically
Mm-hmm.
they'd be like, okay, you owe us like $500,000 because you recorded all these songs. So Lupe might have just been like, well, let me just release this album so I can try to make some of that back to go towards the proceeds. Or maybe he just gave them the proceeds from the album. I don't know. That's what I'm trying to tell myself because like that's hasn't been publicly revealed. That's the only reason why I think he could go from like Tetsuo and You. to Droga's Light. But then you had
to
Droga's
to try
Wave.
to explain the
Yeah,
difference
to
in
explain what happened
quality.
there. Yeah, because people are like, "Oh wow, without a label, he's still messy," and I'm like, "Nah, the label was still involved there. There's something he did not
They
just
had
make."
to be. There's no way
Yeah,
my man Lupe did that on his own.
because then again, when you have when you're signed to a label, like they're footing the bill for a lot of songs that you record, and so if you want to leave and they decide like there's legal stuff that you have to go through.
Hmm.
Um, so and then Drogus Wave feels like the album that he wanted to make, where like it actually had a story to it.
Hmm.
And the story was really good. It was pretty cohesive.
It's
Um,
very long. That was
very long, very
like
long.
20, let me, yeah, 24 tracks and almost nearly 2 hours
Yeah,
of an album.
that was a long album. Um, and so drill music in Zion kind of feels like I would say it's probably his best album since Tetsuo and Youth,
Hmm.
and probably rivals his first two albums that he released.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's that will cover it. Drill music in Zion, fantastic album. If you get a chance to listen to it, please check it out. Um, and I guess what are we going to talk about next week?
Well, I feel
You have any
like
guess?
we've been having a pretty heavy focus on rap, which we both love
Everyone does.
intensely, but we're different from rap.
Yeah,
We listen to a lot of different music.
this is not just a hip hop podcast.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So maybe let's pepper in some R&B. Do you
Okay.
have any recommendations for some R&B, Will?
Well, I know my top R&B artist right now, who's currently putting out music, has got to be Gallant. Definitely got to be
Gallant.
Gallant.
Oh my goodness, where do we even begin with Gallant?
I mean, I think we both know where we have to begin.
We shall begin at the beginning.
All right. So it sounds like we'll be doing Ology by Gallant next week.
Sounds perfect. I can't wait.
That album, man, there's so much to talk to about it. I wish I had appreciated it enough in high school when you first showed it to me, but it's okay. That's in the past. We'll move forward to the
It's
future, and we'll be talking about that next week.
it's a great album. I can't
hmm
wait to as a little sneak peek to how we feel about it.
Yeah, if you can
Can't
listen to it before that, after you're done listening to drill music in Zion, go listen to Ology, and that way you can like be a part of what we're going to be talking about and breaking down.
Yes, absolutely. We can't wait.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you again for joining us on King Whale's album review party. Until next week, when we're talking about Ology, again, go listen to drill music in Zion. Support my favorite rapper and favorite artist of all time, Lupe Fiasco. And we will see you guys next week. And thank you again for joining me, Ty.
As always.